So the other day, I was in a full-blown Spanish conversation that went something like this.
Hola mamita, ¿cómo tú estás?
Bien, ¿y tú cómo estás?
Sí, está todo bien por aquí, gracias. ¿Qué haces ahora?
No mucho, yendo para el centro.
Entonces, ¿cómo vas a llegar ahí? ¿Vas a pegar la guagua? Pegar. Quería decir coger o tomar. Discúlpame, mami. Diablo.
Now, if like me, you've recently learned a language that's close to a language that you already speak, you'd know that this shit happens all the time. In this video, we'll be discussing why it happens, what it's called, and what you can do to reverse it. Let's get into it. So quick background on myself. I'm a native English speaker and I learnt Spanish to a fluent level. Not just ordering food, I'm talking conversational, comfortable, the point where you stop translating in your head. Then I decided to learn Brazilian Portuguese. Now here's the part most people don't tell you. When you start learning Portuguese after Spanish, it seems really easy, almost suspiciously easy. The vocabulary overlaps, the grammar's familiar, you're moving fast, and then about 6 months in, something starts to shift. Your Spanish starts to crack. And I don't mean you forget words, I mean the two languages start bleeding into each other in real time. This phenomenon has a name. It's called language attrition, and it's one of the most fascinating and frustrating things when it comes to learning a new language. Language attrition is the process by which a language you already know deteriorates, not through forgetting, but through interference from a new one. Spanish and Portuguese share around 89% lexical overlap. That's the highest overlap between any two major world languages. In plain English, this means 89% of words share common roots, spellings, and meanings. Essentially, it means that roughly 9 out of 10 words in these languages look, sound, and function similarly. So in essence, when your brain is acquiring a new language, it doesn't start from a clean slate, it builds on the old foundation. So with that in mind, I'm going to discuss 5 specific areas where attrition has hit the hardest. The first is vocabulary bleeding. As alluded to earlier, Portuguese and Spanish share thousands of cognates, but they're not identical. Your brain, however, may start to merge them. A classic one for me is the Portuguese word for now, which is agora. In Spanish, it's ahora. And trust me when I say I've caught myself a few times saying agora when speaking Spanish instead of ahora. But that's not forgetting. That's your brain serving up the most recently activated version of a concept. In my case, the Portuguese is fresher, so normally it wins. But having said that, there are other examples of this as well. Então instead of entonces, ate instead of hasta, logo instead of luego, and depois instead of después, just to name a few. Now, the second area I'd like to discuss is the pronunciation shift. This is the one most likely noticeable to Spanish speakers around you. Portuguese tends to have a lot of nasal sounds, reduced unstressed vowels, and sounds that just don't exist in Spanish. After months of producing these sounds, your Spanish may start to pick them up. Your O at the end of words may get swallowed, and native Spanish speakers will likely pick this up before you do. So in my case in particular, I've noticed a pronunciation shift in the gerundio. So take a word like hablando. That's how it would sound if you were speaking Spanish, properly, in inverted commas. But I may say something closer to hablando. Why is that? Because when speaking Brazilian Portuguese in particular, what you notice is a soft D or an NO sound at the end of the gerundio form. So take a word like falando. Ninguém vai dizer falando. Alguém vai dizer falando. Tô falando com ele. Me entende? And that has sort of crept into the way I speak Spanish. I do have to pinch myself from time to time, but I do find myself doing that. Let me know if you do the same down in the comments below. Whilst there, if you're enjoying this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So the third area we're going to discuss is that grammar interference. That grammar overlap is really subtle. Spanish and Portuguese grammar are close enough that errors are small, which makes it harder to catch. In Portuguese, the definite article is used more frequently than in Spanish. Take something like o João or a Maria. But if you start doing something like this in Spanish, you'll sound crazy. No one's going to say el João or la Maria. La Maria está afuera. ¿Qué es eso? ¿Qué es eso? Nadie va a hacer eso. So don't do it. But it is something that you may see from time to time. Now I'm going to flip the script a little bit. Here's one way speaking Spanish has actually messed up the way I speak Portuguese, and it's the use of lo and la. You may say something as simple as voy a hacerlo in español. I'm going to do that. Voy a hacerlo. In Portuguese, you'd be tempted to say vou fazê-lo. Vou fazê-lo. But ninguém vai dizer isso. Alguém vai dizer vou fazer essa coisa. Vou fazer isso. You won't use lo or la. Technically, it's not incorrect. In fact, when you read, you'll see it a lot, but nobody really speaks like that in the real world. especially in Brazil, as far as I've seen anyway. Let me know if I'm bugging down in the comments below. But this is something that I definitely do when speaking Portuguese, and it makes you sound like a non-native. You do sound unnatural, because when you listen to people enough, you notice they don't really do that. Now, the fourth area we're going to discuss is retrieval competition. Here's the linguistic mechanism behind all of this. When you want to say something, your brain doesn't retrieve one word, it activates a whole cluster. And when two languages are as close as Spanish and Portuguese, the wrong cluster may light up. The technical term is lexical access competition. Both words are so similar phonologically that suppressing one while retrieving the other becomes an active cognitive task, and that task slows you down or trips you up entirely. So potentially, you could just pick the wrong one. Now, needless to say, not all Spanish speakers learning Portuguese or Portuguese speakers learning Spanish experience this at the same level. Immersion, context, frequency of use, and even personality type may affect how strongly this type of attrition hits. So the fifth and final area we're going to discuss is that code switching collapse. Now this one's really hard to describe unless it's happened to you. It's when you fail to cleanly code switch between the two languages. Now in my opinion, a fluent bilingual person code switches on demand. However, after heavy Portuguese exposure, I'll start a sentence in Spanish and a Portuguese word will appear mid-sentence. Not deliberately, not stylistically, it just happens. Now, that involuntary mixing is called uncontrolled code switching, and it's a clear sign that two languages are competing for the same neural real estate. So the million-dollar question, is this reversible? Short answer, yes. Long answer, it depends on what caused the attrition in the first place. Language attrition from interference is generally reversible with active exposure. The moment you reactivate your Spanish or Portuguese consistently, depending on which you learn first, the retrieval competition starts to resolve. What doesn't come back as easily though, is that pronunciation shift. If your Spanish-speaking accent has absorbed Portuguese for long enough, then you may require some phonological work. But to be honest with you, most people are still going to understand what you're trying to say. So do you really have to do that? Perhaps not. Now, one way to avoid this mess altogether is to maintain actively learning both languages at the same time. Yes, you may start one after the other, but don't forget the first. This way, you maintain that separation between the two languages. What would be interesting to know is whether you guys have felt this. Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to share it to somebody else who may find it interesting. If you like accents, culture, and language, I've got a newsletter where I discuss this stuff every week. I'm going to link it down in the description below. And lastly, if you're learning Spanish, go and check out my video where I discuss how I taught myself Spanish in 6 months here. And if you're learning Portuguese, go and check out my video on how I taught myself how to speak Portuguese in 3 months up here. As always, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I will see you in the next one. Peace.